Hello and welcome to Beyond Well. I'm Sheila Hamilton. I had one goal when I started this podcast, and that was to bring zero cost information to you about mental health and the evidence-based tips that you can use to stay well together. And as part of that promise, I only partner with organizations or people whose products I really believe in. So I'd like you to know more about Active Recovery TMS. TMS is an evidence-based non-drug therapy for depression and OCD. And if your depression medication has failed to bring you relief, transcranial magnetic stimulation is both safe, it's effective, and it's covered by most insurances. My late husband did not respond well to antidepressants or mood stabilizers, and I would have given anything to know that there are other remedies for depression that have been studied, tested, and FDA approved. TMS is targeted to the specific area of the brain that is underactive in depression and overactive in OCD. And the patient testimonials, which we're going to be sharing, are so emotional. These people literally have their lives back after undergoing treatment. I believe in the entire team at Active Recovery TMS, and they'll work with you on an individual basis to make sure you get relief. TMS therapy is covered by most insurance plans, and with multiple locations in Oregon and Washington, there is a location near you. Learn more at activerecoverytms.com. Welcome back to Beyond Well. I'm Sheila Hamilton. Future trends in workplace wellness and behavioral health is something that I've been really looking into for the past 3 years. And we've decided to devote a 5-part series featuring some of the world's most influential thought leaders in workplace wellness and mental health. We're going to be discussing why the pandemic shifted the balance toward the whole health of the worker, what trends are going to last in terms of adoption and return on investment, and how to engage employees in dialogue about their mental health, which is a topic that has largely been avoided in most corporate settings up until now. Our first guest to kick off this incredible series is Chris Cummings. He's the CEO of the Sonus Group, the global events organizer for the WellBeing at Work events. And I know Chris, and he's tireless and passionate about mental health. The summits are designed for senior leaders to learn how to create workplaces where employees and organizations thrive. Chris, welcome. I'm so glad you could join us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So you came to the field of workplace well-being in an interesting way. Would you share that with our audience?
Of course. So I've worked in corporate events for about 20 years and I was busy organising international events. And my partner, who has anxiety and depression, had a pretty bad experience at work and was treated pretty poorly, actually. And it just sort of motivated me. It stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, I've got to do something about this. So I took my event experience and took my partner's experience and sort of merged them together, really. And jumped ship from the corporate world and started up my own forum. And here we are now 8 years later and running it globally. So it's really exciting.
How big are you now? How many countries are you in?
So we have 8 annual regional events, spans across North America, Europe, Middle East, South Africa, Asia and Australia. So there's been quite a bit of travel in recent years. Although not in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But it's been such an exciting journey and seeing how different cultures and different regions grappling with this subject but really developing as well, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Would you say that the global pandemic really changed fundamentally people's approach to workplace health?
Yeah, I think it's certainly so. For me, there was some shining lights around the world of people who were passionate about this subject and wanted to do change, such as yourself, Sheila, who were really leading the way. I think the pandemic brought some of those skeptics along because I think the pandemic has touched everyone's mental health and everyone's had some form of experience, whether that be positive or negative. So I really think it's brought it to the fore. And now it's all about taking action and putting that investment in place. We're all talking about it. Let's do it.
Yeah. I want to talk about the trends that you think have become most positive, most beneficial. And I want to start with the trend of the number of people who decided to leave their workplace because they didn't feel supported both emotionally, physically, spiritually. The great resignation I saw as a huge boon to workplace wellness because people could go to organizations that were making them feel better. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think we all had an opportunity to stop and really reevaluate our lives, and that includes our working lives. And I see lots of employees around the world taking stock, sitting back and saying, does this organization's values match mine? Are the working conditions acceptable, or do I want to do something more purpose-driven? I heard an expression the other day, flexible living. So flexibility, I think, is going to be a huge trend, and being able to have that flexibility as an employee is really going to support our well-being and mental health.
Chris, in the beginning, when we were talking about remote versus hybrid workplace versus, a different type of structure for work, it really seemed that there was two camps, that upper management preferred sort of the FaceTime and the hallway handshake. And younger people really liked the flexibility of being able to work wherever they wanted, especially those who had, technical positions and they could just take their laptops with them. Do you see the trend toward totally remote work as being beneficial for people's mental health? Or do you think that there is going to be a point at which we say they're losing out on the opportunity to be in a group, to see one another in another setting other than home? Where do you land on that?
Yeah, it's something that all employers are grappling with at the moment. I think right at the beginning of the pandemic, I think a lot of people were talking about the future is working flexibly. And most of those people lived in huge houses and had lots of space. And if you look at young people in New York or London, they're in shared accommodation, they're in tight spaces. It's not ideal. So I think everyone's different. And I come back to that flexibility piece. I think it is important that we connect and come back together and collaborate. I think that's really important. But that flexible piece is really interesting. You see how some of the tech companies are employing people from all around the world, but based out of their San Francisco office. So I think we'll come to a blend of the two. But I think that flexibility is really important for employees. Everyone needs different things.
I've heard, at some of the conferences I've attended, some of the senior management is most perplexed about how do we create a social environment for these new hires, because many of them kind of miss out on the mentorship that occurs when you see face to face a young person who might be struggling or needs somebody to go to lunch with, So have you heard of any great ideas about companies that are able to create these small communities and a way for people to still connect?
Well, we're doing it in our organisation. We're just a small team. We all work across the UK and globally, but we try and get together and have social activities in the UK. Our UK team, we meet up on a regular basis, and they do the same in North America and in Australia. We've all been working remotely, and I think that there's people who we've hired in Australia and North America that I've never even met.
Wow.
in person. So, I'm really looking forward to getting back out there and meeting and having those regular connections, because I think it's so important, especially, if I think back to the beginning of my career, I learned so much from people in the office, and those moments at the coffee machine are invaluable. So, yeah, I think finding that blend that works for everyone, I think, is important.
Do you want to talk before we move on and from the trends in mental health and workplace well-being that you really think will last, that they've sunk in and they're being adopted by leaders? Are there any others that you want to mention that we haven't talked about?
I think there's been an explosion of health tech and lots of solutions out there. I think it's really important that we focus on outcomes with all of these new initiatives. There's an explosion in so many different areas. And I think the last 2 years, especially, a lot of investment has gone into health tech and mental health. My concern would be there's a lot of stuff out there that might not actually deliver the outcomes that people need. And,
Yeah.
when we're talking about people's health, it's really important that we focus on outcomes. So
Yeah. You can't get it
it's
wrong.
no, exactly, and it's great to see so much happening in this world. And I can't. A day doesn't go by without me discovering something new in this world. So it's very exciting and very fast moving. Let's make sure that those outcomes are delivering for those people.
I think that's probably, and we have a lot of HR leaders who listen to this podcast. It's a lot of what I hear from them is we've offered this tool and nobody's using it. And I always talk about the other steps around creating a culture where people feel safe to be able to actually have that conversation. How can you create that culture so that people do adopt the tools and use them?
There's huge investment going into tools, but you've got a toxic culture.
Yeah.
And so, how's that going to affect anything? I think, I've always said it comes from the top. Leadership play a critical role. They set the tone. Everyone follows that culture that they set. So I think they've got a big role to play in storytelling, in sharing their own stories, in creating that openness within their organizations. You see some pretty scary quotes from leaders sometimes, and we have seen during the pandemic. So let's create open, inclusive cultures where people can thrive, and then those tools that we're investing in will be much better utilized.
When people talk, and this is the thing I always hear from senior leaders is, show me the return on investment. How do you answer that?
Well, first of all, it's just the right thing to do. We've got to look after our people, and so yes, the numbers are important, but look at the burnout cases. Look at the data that we're seeing in sickness and absenteeism and presenteeism. All of these numbers are really, really scary. If it was happening in any other business line or department, if operations were losing that much money through through various things, we would do something about it as leaders. And so we've got to look at it as a critical area of the business. It's a strategic priority, and we have to look after it in that way. So we have to invest, and we have to challenge some of these scary numbers that are out there.
Chris, I was talking with a senior leader about their adoption of one of our tools, and they were saying, that we want to try to get it above 5%. And I said, that's a lofty goal. I think it should be where you have at least 20% of your customers. But if you stop 5% of your people from taking a disability because of a mental health crisis, if you prevent one suicide, if the numbers in terms of the outcomes are so important to keep in perspective, because mental health disability is now accounting for 60% of the absences at work. And I always feel like, it's a different thing. I mean, what is it? Depression is one of the largest factors for companies that are going under because of the number of people that are using presenteeism and absenteeism as a fallback for their depression. And so I always feel like you have to look at the ultimate costs of what's happening with mental illness to decide whether or not a 5% or 6% uptake is actually worth it. I think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think health has become, over the last 2 years since the pandemic, it's shot up the agenda in terms of something that we really need to look at. Of course, people were looking after their health, but not in such a sharp focus as we have done over the last 2 years. And we've seen the effects of what poor health can do. So that covers all health.
Chris, one of the things that I also hear is sort of an objection isn't a person's mental health their own private business, and why should I be asking about it? How do you answer that?
Everyone has a responsibility to try and look after their health and mental health. So I have certain things that I do. I really try and get a good night's sleep. I try and eat healthy. I try and exercise. I don't always tick those boxes every week. Sometimes I'm too busy, but I try my best. So I think, yes, of course, we need to look after our own physical and mental health and do what we can. But if work is making us sick, because of some of the things that the workplace is doing to us, the toxic cultures of managers, poor leadership, all of these
Yeah.
things really can affect us, then workplaces have a responsibility. Because if you're looking after your own health in your own time and doing all of the right things, but then work is making you sick,
Right.
what's an individual supposed to do?
Yeah.
So I think it's a fair point. We all have a responsibility to do what we can, but so does the work.
Yeah, I've never thought about this analogy before, but it's like a person who's doing their best to eat right and exercise and sleep well and have good relationships at home, and then they show up at a toxic chemical plant and the chemical leaches into their system every day. If it's the workplace that's making them sick, and work is often the biggest cause of toxic stress for most people.
Absolutely, and we're spending more and more time at work. That's shown just during the pandemic that our working time has increased by up to 10%, which is an extra hour or two a day because there isn't that switch off. So what are we doing to support our people to not make them sick within the workplace? A lot of us want to look after our health and we're doing all we can personally.
Yeah.
But if we're creating these toxic cultures, we're just going to make it worse.
I was recently on a vacation with my daughter, which was the first vacation we've taken in 3 years. So it was really wonderful. She started returning a lot of emails, and she actually got a note from her boss that said, "All of this can wait. Put down your computer and enjoy your time." And I was like, oh man, what a changed world this is. If in
Amazing.
my 20s and 30s growing up, your boss would take and extract just as absolute much from you as they possibly could, there wasn't a sense that there was a time you could really be off. And I think that that's really changing now.
And whoever your daughter's boss is, that's the sort of leadership we're looking for. We really just people need that break. People
Yeah.
need to switch off. It's so important. Again, I come back to that flexibility piece. I don't work 9 to 5 because that doesn't suit me. I'm a morning person, so I'm really up for it in the morning, and I do some great work. But then, I need to do some exercise in the afternoon because I'll have that post lunchtime slump. So
Yeah.
I take some time out in the afternoon, but I can then pick it up and I'm energized coming into the evening. So again, having that flexibility,
Yeah.
it's really important. Everyone works in different ways. Of course, we need to have that connection piece where we're all together. But if we are doing individual work, it's really important to allow people to have that.
Have you had any great success stories of companies who have been working with you and utilizing your tools and coming to these conferences and have come up to you and said, "This is the big change we're seeing now, Chris, thank you"?
I'm seeing lots of individual smaller initiatives that might be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
My view is we have to take it comprehensive. We have to take it strategic now. So
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of short-term things that some of them have been really great, and some great social connections and bringing people together and doing some great well-being initiatives that might be for a week or two. And those things will have an impact to a point. But my big mantra now is to all leaders, to all organizations, we have to make this a strategic priority. So we don't just look after people's mental health on World Mental Health Day.
Right.
Every day is World
Yeah.
Mental Health Day. Let's not just do a workshop in October or in May. Let's keep that conversation going throughout the year. Our health doesn't stop after 1 month. We have to have this as a priority. So that's my big rallying call. And I haven't seen too many companies doing that really impressively.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we need to be.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to add? We have about 4 more minutes left, and I would love to get your take on anything that I haven't asked, even if it's just what kind of breakthroughs for you happened during the pandemic that you realized, wow, I really do need to be taking better care of my own mental health.
Well, I'm lucky. I live by the beach, so it's not quite a Californian beach, but it's my place. It's where I go with my dog every morning, and it sets me up for the day. Getting out into nature as well, I think is really important, and having that break from the screen. So even if it's just a 10-15 minute walk in the park, it just energizes you. It takes you away from the screen and gives you that boost. I've seen more and more organizations exploring this 4-day week, and it's certainly put my attention, actually. And I'm really interested to see some of the data that's coming out of that. And I can see this becoming something that is taking on. We're seeing in places like Japan, there's organizations there looking at that. So I think that's a really interesting development that's happened. Really, it's accelerated during COVID. And we talked about leadership before. We have that leadership calling and setting a great culture, but if those line managers are not buying into that properly, then those teams will suffer. So I think doing more around the line management area will be really important as well.
I totally agree. I was giving a speech to a group of CISOs, and they're the people who manage all of the intellectual data and all of the potential attacks. And they were saying how difficult it is to have gone up through management, being really good at scheduling, being really good at looking at charts and data. And now they're thrust into this time and place where they really have to know soft skills, and they have to learn empathy and compassion and open listening skills. And this is not the stuff they learned in business school, right?
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's going to be the skills of the future.
That's
Emotional
exactly
intelligence is so important and will be up there alongside, in my view, the traditional qualifications that people are getting. I think it's so important. And we're seeing the way CEOs are shifting, and the sort of qualities that we're seeing from CEOs, and that's exciting. It's really, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to really change how we do things.
Chris, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. It's always just a delight to be in your vibe. So thank you again for joining us. And once again, here's a message from our sponsors. Before we head out, if you've been listening and loving the podcast, as some of you say you have, please give us a heads up or a thumbs up wherever you listen. Mostly Apple Podcast does the best job with their reviews. Thanks again, and make it a great day.
Fora Health is a nonprofit alcohol and drug treatment center in Portland, Oregon that has been helping youth, adults, and families for nearly 50 years. They offer compassionate, comprehensive, and affordable care for everyone, regardless of background, orientation, or ability to pay. Fora recently opened a new state-of-the-art campus in Portland's Southeast Gateway District, and the entire campus is healing and supportive. You can find out more about their full array of evidence-based therapies for drug and alcohol treatment at www.forahealth.org. If you or a loved one needs support, there are many options and personalized approaches to care. Reach out to Fora Health at 503-535-1151 or see the show notes for more details.